Hi, it's Helen Tarrant. Hi, my name is Helen Tarrant and welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. So here, let me share with you what are some of the pros and cons of the different type of properties. But firstly, what is a retail property and what are the pros and cons of a retail property versus, an office space versus a warehouse property. So pros and cons of a retail property. Now, a retail property is anything that's glass front, shop front. So anything you walk along the street and you might see, a cafe, a restaurant, but then you might see a solicitor's office or you might see a government tenant, your Medicares, your childcare, maybe even your hairdressers and your gelato places. They're all retail shops because they're ground floor, glass front, and it's getting people which to walk past traffic. So that's what mainly retail shops are for. Now, when most people have the idea that most people are going to be selling clothing or books or knickknacks out of there, and because of all this online shopping that's actually going a bit downhill. Well, that's not really the case because a lot of these tenants are actually transitioning. So you'll find that a lot of those clothing store tenants, a lot of those bookshop or news agency type tenants, or even like post offices are shrinking, and they're actually being replaced by destination tenants. Now, one of the best type of tenants you can have is destination type tenants. So if the tenant is basically famous for their gelato, or they're famous for their pizza, or they're famous for a particular thing that they do, or a particular service that they have, or they can be the greatest hairdresser in town. Now that's really, really important for your retail premise. Now the reason for that is, that tenant is in and people know where it's located, you've got that longevity. And as an area gentrifies with a retail shop, you can also put up the rents relatively quickly because there's more demand for that shop front and actually less of that type of property around. So therefore, you've got the goodwill of the tenant, you've got longevity, it's in a hub, you've got those things going for you, and you see the rents actually rising really, really fast. And of course, with the downside of a retail tenant is that previously we used to have the demand for not only office type tenants wanting to go into retail, but we also had those clothing shops, those more retail fashion boutiques, and also appliances shops, as well as shops that does a kind of service. But now we're losing that type of tenant because they're actually moving into a small warehouse space instead. So it's not like these tenants have disappeared, they're just now moving to a different type of property. So as a result of that, there's limited tenants for retail that demand for retail at the moment, but you'll find that these type of tenants tend to have longevity. So what always stays in a retail tenancy are always going to be ones that rely on foot traffic. So your food eateries, but also your government tenants who want to have that easy access for their customers. But you also find that a lot of training tenants want to be in retail, but also sometimes you get your accounting and legal firm as well because of that walk past. And of course, we all know dentists love that glass front as well. So one of the things to look out for in a retail property is to see where it is located in terms of the hub, where the demand is coming from, and really how busy is the centre locally and how much vacancy there is in the area. So when you're looking at pros and cons for retail, think about the type of tenant that's going to go there, think about how versatile the premise is going to be, and also think about really, is this area gentrifying? Because that's one of the most important things for retail. As the area gentrifies, you're going to have more and more demand for your shop, and you're going to be able to put up the rent more, and the value is going to grow as well. So that's that for retail. What about an office space? Well, when you are looking for office space tenants and you're looking at offices type properties, they're usually on the second floor, so they don't have to walk past traffic. Sometimes they're in a high rise. So if you're in a CBD, they're usually in a high rise, or if you're in regional areas, they're usually on the second floor because these buildings are not huge. So what's the pros and cons of it? Well, really, for office space tenants, you'll find that office tenants are very transit type tenants. So that can be a downside because sometimes you might find that tenants may not want to commit to being there for 5 years or 7 years, whether they want to have 1 year or 2 years, but they just want to see how their business is going before they commit to anything. So they can be a bit of a transit tenant. The other thing is that office space is very, very liquid. So someone coming in there could go, okay, well, I've got 10 staff at the moment, but 12 months time or 24 months time from now, I might have my business might have shrunk to only 5 staff. So I might need a smaller space. So they move around a lot, especially when they're in a metro, so a city complex, going from one small space to a larger space. So you get more transit type tenants. The other thing to look out for a office tenant is that sometimes your tenant mix is really important. So if you're in this building and you've got professional lawyers, accountants and psychologists all in there, you're likely to attract those kind of tenants. And especially if it's an A-grade building, you're going to attract a big brand name kind of tenants, like, you know, your Deloitte's, your PwC's, and you're going to attract your PKF accountants. All of those much more branded tenants are going to be there. Now, they're going to influence what other tenants get attracted into, and they're also going to influence the rent of that property as well. So as long as these long-term branded name tenants stay, the rent on your property is going to stay at the top level, and you're going to get top tier tenants. But if those tenants start to move out because of poor management in something like a office space, or maybe the lifts didn't get fixed, or maybe the aircon in the building always is broken, it wasn't, the building itself is not kept up to standards, then some of these tenants might move out. And if they move out, what you'll find is that you're starting to attract maybe a second or a third tier type of tenants, which then starts to affect the rent. You can no longer charge the top rent in the market. So tenant mix, especially in an office space, can be really important, especially in metro areas. Less important in regional areas, but definitely in metro areas is much more important as well. So, you know, when you're looking at office, really think about what it is that you're after. Like, firstly, find the tenant mix that is right. Look at that. Look at the location of the property. So what kind of amenities? They're parking for your tenants, or more importantly, is there parking for your tenants' customers? How is the space fitted out? So sometimes if you have a really great professional tenant, they've spent $300,000 or $400,000 on a fit out, but sometimes in office spaces you can just get away with temporary partitions. So you got to look at your property individually and say, hey, is the tenant really settled in here, or they're more transit type of tenants? And also be aware that in office tenants, you can get tenants that move around a lot, but the key tip to that is you will be able to get another tenant relatively easily from the same building, because mostly when tenants move around in the large building, they move around from one office space to another, one floor to another, and you'll find that rotates around, which means it can be a short re-tenanting space for you as well. And of course, because there's a lot more competition on the market for office spaces, there's also a lot of people who are willing to buy office spaces. Even though they've never invested in commercial property, they can buy an office space because it's quite easy to understand. It's really just like buying an apartment. That means that for most people, when they're looking at office space, it is quite a liquid kind of property, so that if you wanted to sell it, as long as you meet market, there's always going to be a buyer. So you can buy and sell office spaces relatively easily. Also, though, one of the downsides is that you can't put up your rent more than what the market is, because there's always a comparison next door. So if next door office is paying this much, you know, you're going to be restricted to that. So that's, you know, but for everything, there's a pro and a con for everything. So, you know, that's it for office space. So let's get to the last one. So our last property to think about is a warehouse property. Now, what do you think when you think about warehouse? Tell me what some of the thoughts that you think about when you think about warehouse. And also, if you've got any questions regarding warehouse type properties, or any of the three I'm talking about, please put it in the comments below and we'll make a separate video for it. So, but moving forward about warehouse space, when you're going to look at it, invest in a warehouse space, one of the things to look at is it a business type warehouse space, meaning it's a small tilt slab type of property, or is it an industrial warehouse space where they're on large land and there's a shed on there? Well, if you're looking at industrial, the biggest thing for you is the land component of the property. The land component is the most important thing, and when you are buying into this property, you got to think about the longevity of it. So you might have an anchor tenant, but the tenant might end up leaving in 3 or 5 years. So what can you do with that? Is the value of that land going to go up? Because if the value of the land is going to go up, it means you can actually break a large warehouse space into tiny little warehouse spaces, which allows you to then put 3 or 4 tenants into a large space. The other thing is, I treat large industrial properties as a bit of a land bank, and if you could land bank it. It just means that you have this time, you allow for time to change, you allow the value to change of that property, which means that later on the land is going to be worth more than the shed on it. But it just means that you could probably bulldoze that shed and put tilt slabs or smaller warehouses or even retail and office space on there. So that's an additional upside, but you may need to wait 10 years for something like that. But that doesn't mean you don't add something like this into your portfolio. The other version of a warehouse is a much smaller warehouse space where you might have an office component or even a retail component. And that goes from anywhere from 60, 80 square meters to anywhere around 250 to 300 square meters. Now, most of them are going to be 2 levels, so you can have straight 1 level or you can have mostly 2 levels, especially in metro areas they're going to be 2 levels. And what you find with them is that they are the most versatile and in demand in this moment in 2019. So the value of those continue to grow, but also more and more people seek them out because you've got the versatility. And what is versatility in that warehouse is that because of the height clearance and the roller doors and the little office space, it allows for people to have more what we call a man cave trade or man cave type of business, which means that if someone wants to just store all this junk in there, they can do that. But if they want to also operate out of there, they can operate a small factory or a small trade workshop out of there, and they've got a little office where they can do computing work and stuff like that. So someone who might be, say, in the flooring business could have a little office space at the front, and then they can be storing all of their stock at the back, and they can still go out and have a place to park their truck and still go out and do the deliveries. They can still do all the installation, so it'll be perfect for them. On the other side, they can also have a mechanic because he has specialist equipment. He can put his hoist up there, he can raise the car, do all his mechanic stuff. He'll have a front office where you can have customers, and then he's got the whole roller door in and out as customers park around there and get their cars in and out. So that's also another very versatile feature of those type of business and business type warehouses. The other thing that I've seen there has been something like dance schools and karate schools, because what you find there is that because of the height and because of the versatility of the premise and where it is, you could easily refurbish it so that it's got the nice feel. It's because it's concrete walls, you can paint it pink, you can paint it yellow, you can paint it black. You can make it quite funky space, and if it has an office space, you can do a lot of your workshops in there and then do the actual training in the warehouse space as well. So there's many options that you have in a warehouse space, especially those small tilt slab warehouse spaces where it goes from anywhere from 60 to 300 square meters, and it just means that you're going to have a shorter retenancy period. So one of the upsides and one of the pros, I guess, for one of these smaller warehouses is that, very, very versatile, very easy to get tenants. Most of the time going to be in a metro area, in a hub, and very much in demand. But the downside is you're also buying them at quite expensive rate per square meter, and that they're coming onto the market and you're paying quite a price for them. But also that they will take a little while before capital growth kicks in on those properties as well. And if you're buying them tenanted, you're going to have to accept a lower yield on those properties because they're so in demand and there's so many people buying them. We're seeing these properties just being built even as vacant properties go, within 4 to 6 weeks of being on the market. And that's across the board in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane as well. Whereas when you compare that with the pros and cons of a large industrial space, what you're really holding industrial space for is really the land, but also you're getting really high yields for industrial space because it's quite risky. It's probably on the higher end of the risk in terms of commercial property. But the thing is, that is going to give you great cash flow. And once you have that cash flow, you can put a buffer for yourself. So if the tenant did vacate, you can spend some time and making that property more tenantable for future tenants as well. But larger warehouses, you've got longer retenancy periods, so you have to budget for that, and that's a downside for it, even though on the other side, you're getting really, really good return for that. So in this video, I've covered the 3 different types of properties. So you've got your retail properties, the pros and cons of the retail property. You've got your office space property, the different pros and cons of office, and of course the 2 different types of warehouse. The offers are with the warehouse space, so the small what I call business retail type of warehousing, also the large industrial. So you've got to think about which one really resounds with you. You see, in any commercial dealing, especially your first one, you got to think which one do you prefer to be your first property? Is it a retail, is it an office, or is it warehouse? And the reason for that is, in your first property you buy, you're going to feel a little bit nervous, you're going to feel a little bit anxious, you're going to be worried about all these things that could possibly go wrong with your property. So it's important to pick a property type that resounds with you, that you can sleep at night and not worry that you're investing in that. Because I can guarantee you, after you've bought your first commercial property, whichever one it is, whether it's office, retail or warehouse, and then for 3 months you realize the tenant continues to pay rent, and that there hasn't been a flood that swept your property away, or a cyclone that took the roof off your property, and that your tenant haven't packed up and left, that you could relax back and go, I don't really care where the property is, I don't care what type it is, as long as it delivers a return, I'm happy with it. But to start with one that really resounds with you. So if you want to find out more, or if you want to have specific questions about commercial property, or just tell me which type of property you prefer, put it down in the comment section. I want to hear more from you. Subscribe, hit the bell, and just keep spreading the word on commercial property. Bye for now.